Everyone told Rowan it was time to let the old dog go. They said Meg was finished, too old, too slow, too worn out to be any use on the farm. They told her to retire the faithful old collie and let the young dog take over. But on the coldest, darkest night of that winter, when a child was lost on the mountain and the young dog failed, it was the old dog everyone had written off who would rise one last time and save a life. This is the story of an aging sheepdog that everyone said was finished, the young woman who never stopped believing in her, and the final greatest run of a loyal old heart. If you've ever loved an old friend that the world had already given up on, this story is going to stay with you. Tap subscribe before we begin, for everyone who knows that loyalty and love only grow deeper with the years. Now let me take you to a hill farm high in the mountains, and the old dog who had one last miracle left in her. Rowan Hale was 26 years old, and she was a shepherd, like her mother and her grandmother before her, on a wind-swept hill farm high in the mountains. It was hard, lonely, beautiful work, hundreds of sheep scattered across steep and rugged land, and only Rowan and her dogs to keep them safe. And the best dog Rowan had ever known was an old border collie named Meg. Meg had been on that farm longer than almost anything. Rowan's mother had trained her as a pup, and Meg had worked those mountains faithfully for many long years. She was a legend in the valley, the smartest, steadiest, most tireless working dog anyone had ever seen. She knew every fold and gully of that mountain, every hidden path, every place a sheep might wander or a storm might gather. She had saved the flock more times than anyone could count, and when Rowan's mother passed away, and a young, grieving Rowan had to take over the farm alone, it had been Meg who taught her. Meg who showed the frightened young woman how to read the mountain, how to move the flock, how to shepherd. In many ways, the old dog had raised Rowan into the shepherd she became. They were not just working partners. They were family, bonded by years and grief and love. But time spares no one, not even the best of dogs. Meg was old now. Her muzzle had gone gray. Her eyes had grown cloudy, her joints stiff and aching in the cold. The dog who had once run the whole mountain from dawn to dark now tired quickly and slept long and moved with a careful slowness that broke Rowan's heart to watch. Meg's working days, everyone agreed, were behind her, and so Rowan had brought in a young dog, a strong, fast, eager collie named Jack, to take over the hard work of the farm. Jack was everything a young sheepdog should be: quick, powerful, full of energy. He was the future of the farm, and he was good, but he was young, and he had not yet learned the deep wisdom of the mountain that Meg carried in her old bones. The neighbors and Rowan's practical old uncle all told her the same thing. "It's time, Rowan," her uncle said gently. "Meg's had a good long life, but she's finished now. You've got Jack to do the work. An old dog that can't work is just another mouth to feed up here. The kind thing is to let her rest, or let her go." They didn't say it to be cruel. On a hard hill farm, every animal had to earn its keep, and an old dog who could no longer work was, to their practical eyes, a burden Rowan couldn't afford. They told her that keeping Meg was just sentiment, and that sentiment was a luxury shepherds could not afford. But Rowan couldn't do it. She looked at Meg, at the old dog who had taught her everything, who had been at her side through the hardest years of her life, who still thumped her tail and looked at Rowan with those cloudy, adoring eyes, and she simply could not send her away. Meg had given the farm her whole life. As long as Rowan had breath in her body, that old dog had a home and a warm place by the fire for whatever time she had left. "You've earned your rest, old girl," Rowan would tell her, scratching the gray ears. "You don't have to work another day. Just stay with me." And so Meg stayed, dozing by the fire, ambling slowly around the farmyard, watching with quiet old eyes as young Jack ran the mountain she had once ruled. She seemed content, but sometimes, on the clear days, Rowan would catch the old dog gazing up at the high peaks with a faraway look, as if some part of her still longed to run them one last time. She would get her chance. And it would cost her everything. It happened in the deep of winter, on a day that began clear and calm and turned, without warning, into something deadly. Rowan's younger sister had come to visit, and she had brought her little boy, Rowan's nephew, Sam, who was just 6 years old. Sam adored the farm, and he adored the animals, and most of all, he adored old Meg, who was endlessly patient and gentle with the child, letting him curl up against her by the fire. That afternoon, Rowan had to take young Jack up the mountain to move a portion portion of the flock down to lower ground, for a storm was forecast to come in that night. She left Sam at the farmhouse with his mother and set off up the slopes with the young dog, meaning to be back well before dark. But the storm came early, and it came far worse than anyone had predicted. One moment the sky was clear, the next a wall of freezing fog and driving snow rolled down off the peaks with terrifying speed, swallowing the whole mountain in a blinding white nothing. The temperature plummeted. Visibility vanished. Rowan, high on the slopes with Jack, was suddenly fighting for her own safety, struggling to gather the panicked sheep in a whiteout where she could barely see her own hands. And down at the farmhouse, in the chaos of the sudden storm, the unthinkable happened. Little Sam, worried about his Aunt Rowan out in the storm and not understanding the danger, had slipped out of the farmhouse to look for her. By the time his mother realized he was gone, the boy had wandered out into the freezing fog up onto the lower slopes of the mountain and vanished into the white. When Rowan finally fought her way back down to the farm, half frozen, and found her sister screaming that Sam was gone, her blood turned to ice. A 6-year-old boy alone on the mountain in a deadly storm, as night was falling and the temperature was crashing far below freezing. Without shelter, without warmth, a child could not survive such a night. They had only hours, perhaps less, to find him. They called for help, but the roads were closing and rescue teams could not reach them quickly in such a storm. There was no time to wait. Rowan grabbed young Jack and plunged back up into the whiteout to search for her nephew herself. But Jack was lost. The young dog, for all his speed and strength, was overwhelmed. He had never faced anything like this. The blinding fog, the screaming wind, the deadly cold. He couldn't find a scent in the chaos, couldn't navigate the mountain he didn't yet truly know. He circled and floundered, frightened and useless, and Rowan realized with mounting horror that her young dog, the future of the farm, could not save her nephew. The mountain in a storm like this was beyond him, and little Sam was somewhere out there in the dark and the cold, running out of time. It was then, back at the farm in her despair, that Rowan looked at old Meg. The old dog was standing at the door, staring up into the storm, her whole body tense and alert in a way Rowan had not seen in years. Meg knew. Somehow the old dog understood exactly what was happening, that the little boy she loved was lost on her mountain, and every ounce of that old faithful heart was straining to go. Rowan hesitated. Meg was old and frail, and the storm could kill even a young dog. To send her out into that was surely to send her to her death. But she looked into Meg's eyes, and she saw something there that decided it, not frailty, but purpose. The old dog was asking for this, begging for it. This was her mountain and her boy, and she knew it better than any young dog ever could. "All right, old girl," Rowan whispered, her voice breaking. "Find him. Find Sam." And with those words, old Meg ran. The dog, who could barely climb the farmyard steps that morning, went up into the killing storm like a shadow of her younger self, driven by something far stronger than her aging body. She put her gray muzzle to the frozen ground and found what young Jack never could, the faint, fading scent of the lost child. And she followed it up into the white, into the places only she knew, the hidden folds and gullies of the mountain she had run for a lifetime. Rowan followed as best she could, stumbling through the whiteout, keeping the gray shape of the old dog just barely in sight. Up and up Meg led her, unerring, along paths Rowan would never have found alone, deep into the storm, until at last, in a sheltered hollow beneath an outcrop of rock, they found him. Little Sam was there, half buried in snow, barely conscious, so cold he had stopped shivering, only minutes from the sleep that would have been his last. He would not have survived much longer. And old Meg did the last great thing of her long life. She lay down against the freezing child, pressing her whole body against his, wrapping herself around him, giving him the last warmth she had. She had found him in time, and now she kept him alive, sharing her failing heat with the boy, while Rowan wrapped him and radioed their position and fought to keep them all alive until help could come. Through the long, brutal hours of that night, the old dog never left the child's side. She lay pressed against him in the snow, keeping the deadly cold at bay with her own body, refusing to move, refusing to quit, long past the point where her old bones should have given out. Whenever Sam stirred, she licked his face and pressed closer. She poured the very last of herself into keeping that little boy alive. And when the rescue team finally reached them in the gray light of dawn, they found a 6-year-old boy, alive, breathing, saved, wrapped in the arms of an old gray collie who had refused to let the cold take him. They carried Sam down the mountain, and he lived. He made a full recovery, warmed back to life, none the worse for his terrible night. The little boy that everyone had feared was lost had been saved. By the old dog everyone had said was finished. But the night had asked everything of Meg, and she had given it. The old dog, so frail already, had spent the very last of her strength saving the child she loved. She had held on through the night by sheer will, and now, her great task done, that will finally let go. Meg came down the mountain in Rowan's arms, and she lived a few more gentle days by the fire she loved, with Sam curled against her, just as he always had, and Rowan's hand never leaving her gray head. And then, quietly, peacefully, warm and loved and surrounded by her family, the old dog slipped away, her heart, which had given so much for so long, finally at rest. The whole valley mourned her. The neighbors who had called Meg finished, her practical old uncle who had told Rowan to let her go. They came, hats in hand, to grieve the old dog who had done what no young dog could, who had climbed into a deadly storm on her last legs and carried a child through the night on the warmth of her own failing body. "I told you that old dog was finished," her uncle said quietly, his own eyes wet, his hand resting on Meg's still warm gray coat. "I was a fool. That old dog had more heart in her than any young one ever will. She knew that mountain, she knew that boy, and she gave her whole life to save him." He shook his head. "There'll never be another like her." They buried Meg on the mountain she had loved and run and ruled for all her long years, on a green slope looking out over the whole valley, where she could watch over her flock forever. And Rowan placed a small stone there, with just a few words, "Meg, the best of us." Little Sam grew up on that farm, and he never forgot the old dog who had saved his life. Every year, on the anniversary of that terrible, wonderful night, he would climb the mountain with his Aunt Rowan and sit by Meg's grave and thank the loyal old heart that had given everything so that he could live. And Rowan carried the lesson of that old dog with her for the rest of her days, that the ones the world calls finished, the old and the slow and the overlooked, so often carry within them a depth of love and loyalty and courage that the young and the strong have not yet learned. That worth is not measured in speed or in usefulness, but in the size of a faithful heart. Old Meg could barely climb the farmyard steps, but when a child she loved was dying on the mountain, she ran that mountain one last time, and she did what no other dog could do, and she gave her whole life to do it. Rowan had refused to give up on an old dog everyone said was finished, and because of that, on the coldest night of that long winter, a little boy came home alive. The old dog had one last run left in her, and she spent it saving a life. That was Meg, the best of them all.